My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 31 years old. And a few nights ago, I stood in my kitchen staring at my front door while the doorbell kept ringing over and over like the past had finally found my address. I didn't move at first. I just stood there with my heart pounding because I knew exactly who was outside. The woman on my porch hadn't really been my mother in over 20 years. Not after the night she left me behind in the middle of a storm and chose my twin instead. Not after everything that came after that. The strange part wasn't that she showed up. The strange part was how desperate she sounded, like she already knew that once I opened that door, nothing would go the way she had imagined. Through the camera, I watched her pace, wipe her face, ring the bell again, then pound on the wood like she could force her way back into a life she had walked out of a long time ago. And behind me, my real life was standing there in silence, close enough for me to feel it. Warm lights, a safe home. The kind of love that doesn't disappear when things get hard. She had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that door, and when she finally saw it, the color drained from her face so fast it almost scared me. She looked past me, her mouth fell open, and she whispered, "No, no, this can't be happening." What she saw in that moment was the one thing she never thought I'd have without her. But to understand why that look on her face mattered so much, you need to know what happened the night a hurricane tore through our lives and taught me exactly who would be saved and who would be left behind. Before I tell you what happened when I finally opened that door, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I really want to see how far this story reaches. I was 11 years old when I learned that being loved and being chosen were not always the same thing. We lived outside Tampa then, in one of those neat little suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looked trimmed and every family was supposed to look perfect from the street. Inside our house, perfect meant high grades, discipline, and living up to the future my mother had already planned for us. My twin, Elena, fit that picture easily. She was brilliant, organized, and calm under pressure. I was the one who filled sketchbooks instead of science notebooks, the one who noticed colors and shapes and little details that nobody else seemed to care about. My mother used to call that a distraction. She said I had potential, but not enough drive. What she really meant was that I was not becoming the daughter she wanted. The night of the hurricane, everything fell apart fast. We had been warned to evacuate, and everybody was rushing through the house grabbing bags, chargers, prescription bottles, and documents. Elena started wheezing in the middle of it. Her asthma always got worse when she panicked, and that night she was terrified. My mother dropped everything and ran to her. I still remember the look on her face. It was pure fear, but it was not fear for both of us. It was fear for one child. She shoved a waterproof folder into my hands and told me to go back upstairs and grab the emergency kit from the linen closet. I did exactly what she said. I was trying to be helpful. I was trying to move fast. But by the time I came running back down the stairs, the front door was wide open, rain was blowing in sideways, and the driveway was empty. At first I thought they had pulled the car around. Then I thought maybe they were in the garage. Then the lights flickered. The wind slammed something hard against the side of the house, and I understood. They had left. I called out until my throat hurt. I ran from room to room with the emergency kit still in my hands like an idiot, like there was still some chance I had gotten it wrong. Then one of the living room windows cracked so loudly I screamed. After that, instinct took over. I locked myself in the downstairs laundry room with my phone, a flashlight, and a towel pressed against the gap under the door, because water had already started creeping across the tile. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone, but I managed to call 911. I kept telling the operator that my family had left me and that I did not know what to do. I was trying so hard not to cry because I thought if I sounded too scared, she would not understand me. A rescue crew got to the house before the worst of the flooding hit. One of the firefighters wrapped me in a heavy jacket and carried me through the rain to the truck, while I held on so tightly to his shoulder that my fingers cramped. At the emergency shelter, I thought my parents would run to me. I thought my mother would grab my face and tell me she had made a terrible mistake. I thought my father would look horrified. Instead, when they finally found me, my mother was pale and furious, and my father looked exhausted. She hugged Elena first. Then she turned to me and said, "Naomi, Why did you not come straight out when I told you to?" I just stared at her because I could not believe what I was hearing. My father said they had assumed I was behind them, that Elena could barely breathe, that it had all happened too fast. Not once that night did either of them say the words I needed most. "I am sorry." In the weeks that followed, my fear turned into something uglier. I could not sleep through heavy rain. I woke up gasping whenever I heard wind against the windows. My grades slipped. I jumped every time my mother raised her voice. And instead of getting help for me, my parents acted like I had become an inconvenience they had no energy left to manage. My mother kept saying Elena needed stability and calm. What she meant was that Elena needed all of them, and there was not enough room left for me. A month later, they sat me down and told me I would be going to live with my Aunt Valerie in Arizona for a while. They called it a fresh start. They called it what was best for me. But I knew what it really was. They were sending away the reminder of the worst thing they had ever done, because it was easier than looking at me and admitting they had left one daughter behind. I cried almost the entire flight to Arizona. I remember pressing my forehead to the airplane window and wondering if being sent away was what I deserved for not being enough. That is what years of favoritism will do to a child. It trains you to turn every cruelty into a flaw inside yourself. My Aunt Valerie lived in Scottsdale with her husband and 2 teenage sons. I had met them before on holidays, but they had always felt like distant relatives in another version of my life. The first thing she did when I walked into her house was take my overnight bag from my hands and tell me that nobody was going to rush me there. Then she showed me a bedroom with yellow curtains, clean sheets, and a basket on the dresser filled with sketchbooks, colored pencils, markers, and little snacks. I stood there looking at it so long that she finally asked if something was wrong. I said no. But what I meant was nobody had ever prepared for me like that before. Nobody had ever seemed happy that I was coming. The first few months were hard. I still jumped at thunderstorms. I still checked the driveway sometimes with this stupid hope that my parents would show up and say it had all been a terrible misunderstanding. They never did. They called a few times at the beginning, but the calls were cold and awkward, as if I were a responsibility they were trying not to forget. Then those calls got shorter. Then they got less frequent. Eventually, even the pretending stopped. My father kept sending money to help with my expenses, and for a while that confused me. As a kid, I took it as proof that maybe they still cared. As an adult, I understand it differently. Money was easier than presents. Money was easier than apology. Money was easier than loving me. Elena and I stayed in touch in secret at first. We messaged late at night, then video called when she could. She told me our mother got tense every time my name came up. She told me my father avoided the subject completely. She told me she missed me so much it made her chest hurt. I believed her, because even back then I knew Elena was not my enemy. She had been chosen, yes, but she had not asked to be. That did not erase my pain, but it kept bitterness from swallowing the one good thing I had left from that house. My Aunt Valerie never tried to turn me into a new person. She just gave me room to become myself. When school started, she let me join the design club without asking whether it would hurt my grades. When I wanted to try out for soccer, she drove me to early morning practice and sat in the car with a coffee while I ran drills in the heat. When I brought home a poster I had designed for a school fundraiser, she hung it on the refrigerator like it was museum-worthy. That sounds like such a small thing, but when you grow up being treated like a disappointment, ordinary encouragement feels like oxygen. Slowly, I changed. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. My grades improved because I was not living in a constant state of fear. I made friends. I laughed more. I slept through storms eventually. By high school, I knew I was not going back to Florida for good. Arizona had become home. Not because it was perfect, but because I was finally safe there. I met Ethan during my junior year at a community art event my aunt had pushed me to join. He was helping set up drafting boards for a local architecture workshop and got sawdust on one sleeve of his shirt and charcoal on the other because he had no idea what he was doing in an art space. He smiled at me like meeting me was the easiest thing in the world. No performance, no judgment, just kindness. We became friends first, then inseparable. He liked that I noticed the way buildings made people feel. I like that he listened when I talked. Really listened. Like my thoughts were worth holding on to. By the time college came around, we already knew we were building something real. We stayed together through finals, bad apartments, part-time jobs, and all the messy in-between years when you are becoming adults without having any idea what that actually means. When we got married, it was not grand or flashy. It was small and warm and full of people who loved us on purpose. My Aunt Valerie cried before I even made it halfway down the aisle. Elena stood beside me. My parents were not there. They did not know. Or maybe they knew, and chose not to come. Either way, the result was the same. A year later, our son Milo was born, and the first time I held him, I made myself one promise. He would never have to wonder if he was wanted. He would never have to earn softness. He would never confuse survival with love. By then, more than 10 years had passed since the storm. I had a beautiful life in Scottsdale. I did branding work and painted murals for local businesses. Ethan had his architecture firm. Milo had my eyes and his father's patience. Elena visited when she could and became the kind of aunt every child should have. As for my parents, they were like ghosts attached to an address I no longer lived at. Their silence had stretched so long that it almost felt permanent. Then, one afternoon, Elena sat at my kitchen counter, looked down at her coffee, and said our mother had been asking about me again. That was the first tremor before the earthquake. At first I thought Elena was exaggerating. People say things like, "I have been thinking about you," or maybe it is time to reconnect all the time without actually meaning anything real by it. But then she showed me the messages. Our mother wanted to know if I was doing well. She wanted to know if I still lived in Arizona. She wanted to know if Elena thought I would be open to hearing from them. There it was, right in front of me. And even then, I felt more annoyed than emotional. Not because I had fully healed, but because the timing insulted me. 10 years of silence, 10 years of birthdays missed, milestones ignored, a wedding they did not attend, a grandson they had never met. And now suddenly, they were curious. Curious was such a small word for what they had done. A day later, a message request landed in my inbox from my mother. It was short, almost painfully neutral. She said she and my father would be in Arizona for a few days and wondered if they might stop by to see me. No apology, no acknowledgement of the storm, no mention of sending me away. No admission that they had spent years acting as if one daughter had been enough. Just a polite little sentence like she was asking to meet an old neighbor for coffee. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it and protect the peaceful life I had built. Another part of me wanted to answer with every brutal truth I had swallowed since childhood. But the strongest feeling, the one I hated admitting, was curiosity. I wanted to know what they looked like now. I wanted to see whether regret had changed them. I wanted them to walk into my home and understand, finally, that abandoning me had not ruined me. I had built something better than what they left me with. So I wrote back. I told them they could come by Saturday afternoon. I kept it simple. I did not tell them much about my life beyond my address. I did not mention Ethan. I did not mention Milo. I did not mention that Aunt Valerie would be over helping me organize some things in the kitchen that day. I told myself I was not setting a scene. I was just refusing to hide the life I had made. But if I am honest, part of me wanted them to feel it the second they walked in. I wanted them to see with their own eyes that I had found the kind of family they never gave me. As Saturday got closer, I became restless. I cleaned things that were already clean. I rearranged throw pillows twice. I checked the doorbell camera even when nothing moved outside. Ethan noticed, of course. He always notices. He asked if I wanted him to take Milo and go spend the afternoon somewhere else. I said no immediately. This was our house. I was not going to clear out my life to make room for my past. He nodded and kissed my forehead and did not push. Aunt Valerie arrived before lunch with groceries and that calm energy of hers that could lower my blood pressure without saying a word. She knew my parents were coming by then. I had told her the night before. She did not try to talk me out of it. She just squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever happens, you do not owe anybody a version of yourself that makes them comfortable." Elena texted around 1 to say she was on her way too. That mattered more than I let on. There was something about having my twin there that made the whole thing feel bearable. Not because she could fix it, but because she had seen enough of our childhood to know I was not imagining any of it. Around 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang for the first time. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a step in the dark. I looked at the camera and there they were. Older, of course. My father's hair had gone grayer. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, but not softer. I expected them to stand there politely and wait. Instead, when I did not answer right away, my mother rang again. Then again. Then she knocked. Then rang one more time. 15 years would have been easier to ignore than those 15 minutes. The whole house seemed to hold its breath around me. Ethan stood in the hallway with Milo in his arms. Aunt Valerie came out of the kitchen and said nothing. Elena set her bag down and moved closer. I watched my mother pace on the porch, wipe under her eyes, ring the bell again, and glance over her shoulder like she was afraid of being seen. Something inside me shifted then. When I was 11, I had stood trapped in a house begging for someone to come back for me. Now she was the one standing outside, waiting, powerless, because I had the choice. And for the first time in my life, that choice belonged entirely to me. When I finally turned the handle, I did it slowly enough that the silence felt deliberate. My mother was mid-breath when the door opened. My father straightened immediately. For one strange second, all three of us just stared. Then my mother looked past me. I watched the exact moment her face changed. Her eyes landed first on Ethan, then on Milo tucked against his chest, then on Aunt Valerie standing a few feet back, and finally on Elena inside the house beside me. She went pale so fast it was almost shocking. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then she whispered, "No. No. This cannot be happening." There was no drama in my voice when I answered. Just clarity. I said, "You wanted to reconnect. This is my life." They stepped inside like they were walking into a church after doing something unforgivable. My father kept clearing his throat. My mother could not seem to decide whether to cry, apologize, or defend herself, so she did all three badly without committing to any of them. Ethan gave a brief nod and introduced himself. He did not volunteer anything more. He never tries to occupy space that belongs to me. He just stays close enough that I can feel I am not alone. Aunt Valerie crossed her arms, not hostile, just steady. Elena stayed near the window, arms at her sides, jaw tight. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody pretended this was casual. My mother tried first. She said she had been thinking about me for a long time. She said too much time had passed. She said seeing me now was overwhelming. I looked right at her and asked the question I had waited years to ask. Why now? She blinked and said, "Families should not stay broken forever." It was such a polished answer that I almost laughed. Families should not leave a child in a hurricane either, but here we were. My father stepped in then with his version of events, the one I think he had repeated to himself enough times that it felt true. He said the night of the storm had been chaos. He said Elena could not breathe. He said they thought I was behind them. He said fear makes people make mistakes. I let him finish. Then I said, the mistake was driving off. The choice was everything that came after. You sent me away. You left me there. You never came back for me. My mother started crying, real tears this time, but I could not tell whether they were for me or for herself. She said they had believed Arizona would be good for me. She said I was struggling and needed a different environment. She said Elena was fragile after the storm and they had to keep things calm at home. There it was. Even after all these years, she still told the story in a way that made her sound practical, and me sound like fallout. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage exactly, just certainty. I told her that I still remember the sound of the window cracking while I was alone in that house. I told her I remember crouching on the laundry room floor with wet socks and a dying flashlight, trying not to scream into the phone while I begged a 911 operator to stay with me. I told her I remember a firefighter carrying me through waist-high water, and I remember thinking my mother would finally hold me when she saw me again. Instead, the first thing she did was act like I had made everything harder. Nobody interrupted me. Even Milo, who had been babbling softly in Ethan's arms, went quiet as if the room itself had changed temperature. Aunt Valerie spoke then, and when she did, her voice was calm enough to hurt. She said, "When Naomi came to us, she barely slept through the night for months. She apologized for everything. She flinched when doors shut too hard. She was 11 years old. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. My father stared down at the floor. I turned to them again and said the words I think I had been carrying for half my life. You did not just leave me in that storm. You kept leaving me, over and over, every day after that. That landed harder than yelling ever could have." My mother sank onto the edge of the couch like her knees had given out. She looked at Milo then. Really looked at him. And something unreadable passed over her face. Maybe she saw what she missed. Maybe she saw what she could never get back. She asked very softly, "Why did Elena never tell us?" Elena answered before I could. "Because it was not my story to hand over after you spent years acting like she did not matter." My father winced like that sentence had weight. For a moment I thought maybe this was it. Maybe one of them would finally say we were wrong. Maybe the room had become honest enough for that. But my mother ruined it. She looked up at me through tears and said, "We did the best we could." I actually felt my body go still. Not numb, not detached. Just completely still, the way you go still when you realize nothing meaningful is coming. I said, "The emergency lasted one night. Your best should have started the next morning." Ethan moved then and gently kissed Milo's head before setting a diaper bag on the chair. It was such a small domestic movement, so ordinary and loving, but it sliced through the room. My mother saw it too. She saw the life in the details, the safe house, the husband who did not speak over me, the aunt who never left, the sister who stood beside me, the child who would grow up knowing exactly where he belonged. That was when I understood why her face had gone white at the door. She had not come to reunite with the broken version of me she remembered. She had come expecting access to someone she thought would still be waiting. Instead, she found a woman whose life had become complete without her. After that, there was nothing left to salvage. My father muttered that perhaps the timing was bad. My mother stood slowly, clutching her purse with both hands. She said, "Maybe they should go." I did not stop them. I did not say, "Come back any time." I did not say, "I forgive you." I just held the door open. As they walked out, my mother turned once like she wanted to say something else. Something bigger, but whatever it was died behind her lips. The door closed. The house went quiet. I thought I would feel triumph. Instead, I felt grief and relief tangled so tightly together I could not separate them. Aunt Valerie wrapped one arm around my shoulders. Ethan pressed his forehead to mine for a second. Elena whispered, "I am sorry I was not old enough to do more." And for the first time in years I let myself cry for the child I had been, not because she was weak, but because she had survived long enough to become me. For 3 days after that visit, I almost believed the worst part was over. I was wrong. The message from Elena came while I was folding baby clothes on the living room rug. She texted, "Have you checked Facebook?" I had not. I barely used it anymore except for business posts and family photos. When I opened the app, my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. My mother had written a long post about how she and my father had tried to reconnect with their estranged daughter after years of pain only to be humiliated at my home in front of my new relatives. She called me cold. She called me cruel. She said she had come in peace and been punished for mistakes made in a moment of panic long ago. She wrote the whole thing like she was a grieving mother rejected by an ungrateful child. And then came the part that told me exactly who she still was. She had tagged people from my professional life, clients, local business owners I had worked with, a former collaborator, even one of Ethan's contacts. My hands started shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Ethan found me like that 10 minutes later and took one look at my face before reading the post over my shoulder. He did not say, "Calm down." He did not say, "Maybe she did not mean it that way." He said, "This is deliberate." And it was. It was retaliation dressed up as heartbreak. My mother had not gotten the reunion she wanted, so she tried to take something else from me, Not my childhood this time. My reputation. My peace. The old instinct to go silent kicked in first. That is what happens when you grow up being blamed for other people's cruelty. You start by wondering how you can make yourself smaller to stop the damage. But I was not 11 anymore, and this was not a storm I had to survive alone. Ethan called Aunt Valerie. Elena started sending screenshots because people had already begun sharing the post. One of my clients texted me directly and said she hoped I was okay and that she figured there had to be more to the story. That little message snapped something back into place inside me. I did not owe anyone polished silence. I was not the one who should be embarrassed. So I commented. Not a rant. Not a tantrum. Just the truth. Clean and sharp. I wrote that yes, my parents had come to my home after more than a decade of distance. I wrote that they had not apologized for leaving me alone in a hurricane when I was 11. I wrote that after I was rescued, I was blamed for the chaos, sent away to another state, and largely ignored for years, while one daughter remained the center of their family, and the other became a problem best managed at a distance. I wrote that if their version of reconnection depended on erasing the truth, I wanted no part of it. Then I stopped. I did not insult them. I did not embellish. I let the facts breathe. What happened next was faster than I expected. People began replying to my comment instead of their post. Elena commented too, just one sentence, but it mattered. She wrote, "I love both my sister and my parents, but Naomi is telling the truth." Aunt Valerie did not comment publicly, but she messaged me old photos of me at 11 and 12 in Arizona, all hollow eyes and forced smiles and oversized sweaters. Proof without words. A cousin in Florida chimed in saying the family had known for years that something terrible had happened and that my parents had never told the story honestly. Former neighbors started whispering in the comments about how obvious the favoritism used to be. By that night, the post had turned against my mother so badly that she stopped responding. But even then, she did not take it down. She kept it up because pride is a powerful drug, especially in people who care more about control than repair. Over the next 2 days, the fallout spread. 2 local businesses quietly paused upcoming mural projects with me, not because they believed my mother, but because public mess makes people nervous. Then, just as quickly, one of them reached back out after reading the full thread and apologized for hesitating. Another client sent a voice note saying she had chosen me precisely because I seemed honest, and that this only confirmed it. Ethan's business contact called him and said none of this would affect their work. My mother had wanted to isolate me. Instead, she gave me something I had never really had before. Witnesses, public ones, people who saw the shape of the truth and stepped closer instead of away. My father called twice from a number I had not saved. I let it ring. Then he texted that things had gotten out of hand and that perhaps we could all agree to stop discussing private family matters online. I stared at that message and laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly predictable. They had made it public when they thought they could control the narrative. Now that the narrative was not flattering, suddenly privacy mattered. Elena went to see them the next morning. I did not ask her to. She volunteered. When she came back, her expression said everything before she opened her mouth. Our mother was furious. Our father was embarrassed. They claimed I had exaggerated. They claimed the internet was twisting things. They claimed I had poisoned Elena against them. Then, according to Elena, my mother finally said the quiet part out loud. She said she never imagined I would air out family pain just to save my image. Elena told her, "You did that first." She also told them that if they did not remove the post, I would have every right to speak even more openly than I already had. That was when my father apparently asked what I wanted. Elena said she answered for me. The truth respected. The post gone. No more using other people to get to her. My mother, still clinging to some illusion of leverage, said if they deleted it, they were done with me for good, and I should not expect anything from them ever again. Not support, not contact, not inheritance. Elena told me she looked right at them and said, "You talk like you are taking something from her. You lost her years ago." That was the moment, I think, that even she stopped standing in the middle and finally stepped out of the smoke. By the end of the week, the Facebook post was gone. No apology replaced it, no correction, no admission. Just silence again. The same silence my parents had used for years whenever the truth made them uncomfortable. But it was not the same kind of silence this time. Before, their silence had been powerful because it left me alone with my memories. Now it looked different, smaller, defensive, cowardly even, because other people knew. Not every detail, not every scar, but enough. Enough to understand who had been harmed and who had tried to rewrite the story to protect themselves. The fallout did not arrive in one dramatic explosion. It came in layers, which made it feel more real. My mother served on a hospital volunteer board connected to patient family support. Within days, she had stepped away from it, officially for personal reasons. Unofficially, people had begun asking questions about why a woman who publicly spoke about compassion and family care had treated her own daughter the way she had. A small consulting group she worked with on discharge planning did not renew her next contract cycle. Nobody announced that the Facebook incident was why, but people do not like controversy tied to someone whose professional image depends on empathy. My father's world narrowed too. Friends who used to golf with him suddenly became busy. A couple from church stopped returning their calls. Extended family, especially relatives who had stayed neutral for too long, began reaching out to me instead. Some apologized for not asking harder questions years ago. Some admitted they had sensed something was wrong but let my parents control the version everyone heard. And Elena, the daughter who had been chosen, stopped shielding them from consequences. She did not cut them off with a big dramatic speech. That would not have been like her. She just changed. She stopped rushing to defend their intentions. She stopped smoothing their rough edges in conversations. She stopped pretending love meant making excuses. When our mother called her crying a few days later and said the family was turning against them, Elena answered, "They are not turning against you. They are finally facing what Naomi had to face alone." When Elena told me that, I cried harder than I had when my parents walked out of my house. Because for years, some piece of me had still ached over the fact that the child who was chosen got to remain inside the family while I became the one sent away. Hearing that even she could see the full shape of it now did not erase my pain, but it did ease a loneliness I had been carrying for far too long. My parents sent one final message through Elena after the post came down. They said they were removing me from the will and that I should consider our relationship permanently over. I told her the truth. There was nothing for me to mourn in that message. You cannot threaten to withhold a future from someone after refusing to show up for their past. By then, Ethan and I were doing well. Our home was ours. Our work was honest. Our son was healthy. Aunt Valerie was in our lives every week. Elena had become family in a real and active way, not just by blood, but by choice. My parents could keep their money, their conditions, their selective version of love. None of it had the power to define me anymore. One evening, not long after everything settled down, a summer storm rolled over Scottsdale. Nothing like the hurricane, of course, but the wind picked up, and rain tapped against the windows just hard enough to pull an old memory loose. I was in the nursery with Milo when the first thunder cracked. My body stiffened on instinct before my mind could catch up. Ethan noticed from the doorway. He did not ask me what was wrong. He just came in, put one hand on the back of my neck, and stood there with me while I rocked our son. Milo blinked, yawned, and fell asleep against my shoulder like the storm outside had nothing to do with him. And in that moment, I understood something that felt bigger than revenge, even though revenge had been the road that brought me there. The deepest justice was not seeing my mother embarrassed on my porch. It was not watching her post collapse online. It was not hearing that the community had finally stopped buying the image she sold. The deepest justice was this. My child was safe in my arms during a storm, and he would never have to question whether I would stay. That was the thing she could never take from me. Not then. Not now. Not ever. People love to say forgiveness is the only way to heal, but I do not think that is always true. Sometimes healing looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let someone back into your life just because they share your last name. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth after years of swallowing it. And sometimes the most educational, valuable lesson a person can learn is that boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are wisdom. Boundaries are self-respect. Boundaries are how you protect the soft and important parts of yourself from people who only show up when they want access, not accountability. If there is one thing I hope people take from my story, it is this. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is made up of the people who stay when things get ugly, who tell the truth when it would be easier to lie, who choose your safety over their pride, and who never make you feel like love is a prize you have to earn. My aunt taught me that. My husband proves it every day. My sister, in her own painful way, learned it too. And my son will grow up surrounded by that kind of love from the beginning. So no, I do not regret opening the door. I regret that a child version of me ever had to wait for it. But I am proud of the woman who stood there years later and realized she no longer needed the people on the porch to tell her she mattered. I already knew. And if you have ever been the person someone treated as less than, less lovable, less worthy, less chosen, I hope you know it too. Sometimes the people who fail you most are the ones who should have protected you first. That is heartbreaking. But it is not the end of your story, unless you let it be. You are still allowed to build something beautiful after being left in the dark. You are still allowed to walk away from people who only love you on their terms. And you are still allowed to become the kind of home you once needed. Tell me honestly, do you think forgiveness should always come first? Or are there times when choosing peace and protecting yourself is the stronger answer?